Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You know how this works? You give us a mountain of research and we dig through it to find the good stuff. And today, we're going deep on President Jimmy Carter.
The 39th president, to be exact.
Right, 39th. But we're not just looking at his time in office. We're going way beyond those headlines about peanuts and, well, trying to understand his impact on the world both during his presidency and long after he left the White House.
Which is pretty impressive considering he's currently the longest living president in U.S. history.
Absolutely. So let's rewind the clock back to 1924.
To Plains, Georgia.
Yeah, Plains, Georgia. You know, I have to admit, whenever I hear Plains, Georgia, I just can't help but think of peanuts.
Well, it's hard not to. I mean, the man was a peanut farmer before he got into politics. It's not exactly the typical resume for a president, is it?
No, not really. You don't see that every day.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to think about how his background shaped his approach to leadership. And he wasn't just a farmer, he was also a Democrat and the governor of Georgia before becoming president.
Right, so he brought this kind of outsider perspective to Washington. But he also had experience navigating the political landscape.
Yeah, a unique combination for sure. And speaking of navigating tough situations, let's talk about his achievements as president. When I think of Carter, I immediately think of the Camp David Accords.
Oh, absolutely. That was a major accomplishment, bringing Egypt and Israel together after decades of conflict.
Decades, yeah. I mean, they had been at war for so long. It's hard to imagine the kind of tension and mistrust that had built up over the years.
It was a huge deal, and Carter played a key role in making it happen. He personally invested time and energy into building relationships with both Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. And that personal touch really made a difference.
Yeah, I read that he actually invited them to Camp David to create this kind of informal atmosphere for dialogue.
Exactly. He understood that they needed space to talk openly and honestly without all the formalities and pressures of a traditional summit.
And it worked. I mean, they actually
Big
reached a
money.
peace agreement. It didn't solve all the problems in the Middle East, of
Of
course.
course not.
But it was a monumental step toward peace in the region.
Absolutely a monumental step. And it ultimately earned Carter the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, but not until 2002. That's over 20 years later.
It makes you wonder why there was such a delay. Sometimes I think it takes time for the true impact of an event to sink in.
Yeah, you need that historical perspective. It's
Yeah.
like you can't fully appreciate the significance of something until you've had some distance from it.
Right. But moving on from the Camp David Accords, Carter also faced a ton of challenges during his presidency. I mean, think about the energy crisis in the late 1970s.
Oh, yeah. Oil prices were through the roof.
Through the roof. And people were worried about running out of gas. There were lines at the pumps.
It was a real crisis.
Yeah.
And Carter was really focused on finding solutions. He pushed for energy conservation.
Right. Things like setting thermostats lower in the winter and driving less.
And he also invested in renewable energy sources like solar and wind power.
He was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. He even put solar panels on the roof of the White House.
He did. I did not know that.
Yeah. It was a symbolic gesture, but it also showed that he was serious about finding alternative energy sources.
And it's interesting to think about how those energy challenges back then connect to what we're facing today with climate change and the push for sustainable energy.
Definitely parallels there. But Carter's focus wasn't just on domestic issues. He also made human rights a central part of his foreign policy.
Right. He really emphasized the importance of democracy and freedom around the world.
And he wasn't afraid to stand up to authoritarian regimes, even if it meant straining relationships with certain allies.
Which couldn't have been easy during the Cold War.
No, not at all. But he believed that the U.S. had a moral obligation to promote human rights.
And he was willing to put those beliefs into action. But of course, we can't talk about Carter's presidency without addressing the Iran hostage crisis.
It's impossible to ignore. It really dominated the last year of his time in office.
It's hard to imagine what that must have been like. Those 52 Americans held captive for 444 days.
444 days. It was a national trauma. People were glued to their TVs every night waiting for news. And the failed rescue attempt just made things worse.
Yeah, it really damaged his public image. And even though he did secure their release on the day he left office,
A day he left office, yeah.
the crisis really overshadowed a lot of his accomplishments.
It's a shame because he did achieve a lot during his presidency. But the hostage crisis really defined his legacy for many people.
It's a reminder of how one event can have such a lasting impact. But what's amazing is that Carter didn't let that defeat define him. He went on to have this incredibly impactful post-presidency.
Absolutely. He didn't just retire and fade away. He founded the Carter Center.
In 1982.
Yes, and through the
Mm.
Carter Center, he's worked tirelessly to promote peace and democracy around the world.
And he's been involved in so many humanitarian efforts. Like I remember seeing him on TV working with Habitat for Humanity.
Building houses for people in need.
It's just incredible to see a former president rolling up his sleeves and getting his hands dirty like that.
It really shows his commitment to service. He's not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk.
Yeah, he's really dedicated his life to making a difference. And I think that's what makes him so inspiring. He's faced setbacks and challenges, but he's never given up on his ideals.
It's a powerful message, and I think it challenges us to think about what it means to be a leader.
To make a real impact on the world.
Exactly. So as we wrap up here, I'm curious what stands out to you most about Jimmy Carter's story?
I think it's his resilience and his unwavering commitment to his values. He didn't always make the popular choice, but he always tried to do what he thought was right.
And he never stopped trying to make a difference, even after leaving the White House.
It's a pretty incredible legacy, and it leaves us with a lot to think about. How should we ultimately judge his presidency?
How should we balance the successes with the failures?
And how much weight should we give to his incredible post-presidency work?
It's a complex question, but one worth pondering.
Absolutely, and one that we hope you'll continue to think about long after this deep dive is over.
Thanks for listening, everyone,
We'll see you next time.
for another deep dive.
Bye-bye.
Bye.